Okay. So, dear folks who made it to this Zoom meeting, regrettably we cannot meet Professor Vardi in person, but it's better than no meeting. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Moshe Vardi from Rice University to give this very apropos or current presentation on digital humanism. Professor Vardi is a Karen Ostrom George Distinguished Senior Professor at the Computer Science Department or Computer Engineering and Science Department at Rice University. He came from Israel. He was educated at Bar Ilan University, later Weizmann University and Hebrew University. And he has many, many publications. He came to United States first to IBM Almaden, which is, as many of you know, here in California, in the research laboratory, and then from there he was recruited to Rice University. Well, he has, as I said, many, many publications. I think somewhere I found 600, but who is counting at this point? And he has he has many awards, but one of the awards that stuck to my eye is the Gödel Prize from 2000, which is one of the most prestigious prizes in theoretical mathematics and theoretical computer science. Professor Vardi is really a logician, to put some label on him, and has applied logic to various applications in computer science. So, but today, I think he's going to use all his mathematical skills to talk a little bit about the crisis, the human crisis that we are experiencing today in this new digital world. So thank you, Moshe, for taking the time to talk to us, and welcome to Berkeley and everybody else who is watching us.
Thank you, Regina. I'm glad to engage in this conversation with a Berkeley audience, but also a global audience.
Yes.
So I think that we all recognize that we are living now in a crisis, but it's a quintuple crisis. It's a crisis with multiple aspects. First and foremost, it's a public health crisis. And I'm sure all of you are looking like me every day in a dashboard to see how the US is doing, how the world is doing, how the locality right now is doing. You know, we seem to have a governor who wants to say Texas should be #1. So this is crisis #1. Of course, this creates an economic crisis. This is not the Disneyland parking lot. These are people waiting in their car to get some food from food banks. Thousands of people waiting to get food in food banks. There's an energy crisis. We may think the cheap oil is a good thing, but it's not only destroying an industry, but what does it do to green energy? If oil is too cheap, then the green energy industry is also being crushed. And then, of course, there is a social crisis taking place. There are protests and counter-protests and huge social disturbances. And then on top of it all, I don't want to get into a big debate here, but clearly there is a leadership crisis on top of this. So this is the world we live in today. And I want to take you back to a concept that we discussed in March. Now March seems like a long, long time ago. But in March, we talk about flattening the curve. So all epidemics go by rising and then falling. At some point, academics say, there are no more, the virus cannot find new hosts. But people talk about flattening the curve. We should at least do it slower. And what is the reason that we want to flatten the curve? it's not so much that fewer people will be sick, but we will have fewer sicker people at the same time. For example, in Houston right now, we've reached ICU capacity. And that's a very bad thing for health system to reach ICU capacity, because that means now if I have another emergency and I go to the hospital, there's no bed for me in the ICU. And we discover other shortages, ventilators, PPEs. We all suddenly know a new acronym that none of us knew 3 months ago, PPE. And we didn't have enough of it. Why didn't we have enough of it? So, building beds in hospitals is enormously expensive. But stocking PPE does not seem that expensive. Why didn't we do it? And so this inspired William Goldstone, who is a Brookings Institute, to write a column in the Wall Street Journal in March. And he said, efficiency is not the only economic virtue. And he said, what if the relentless pursuit of efficiency, which has dominated American businesses thinking for decades, has made the global economic system more vulnerable to shocks? And he said, efficiency comes through the optimal adaptation to existing environment. You are adapting yourself so there will be no waste, no mis-efficiency. While resilience requires the capacity to adapt to disruptive changes in the environment. So there is a fundamental trade-off between resilience and efficiency. And we seem to have put all of our eggs in one basket: efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. 2 months later, Tom Friedman, who was viewed as one of the prophets of globalization, wrote a column in the New York Times, How We Broke the World. He said, greed and globalization set us up for disaster. He says, over the past 20 years, we've been steadily removing man-made and natural buffers, redundancy, regulations, and norms that will provide resilience and protection when big systems, be they ecological, geopolitical, or financial, get stressed. We have been recklessly removing this buffer out of an obsession with short-term efficiency and growth, or without thinking at all. Again, we put all of our eggs in the basket of efficiency, ignoring resilience. This idea that efficiency, which we all think, well, we should celebrate efficiency. Being efficient sounds good, but the danger of efficiency, it's an idea that, as far as I could tell, go back to the first time to a paper in 1975. The title was on the inefficiency of being efficient. And the argument in that article from 1975 was that you focus only on efficiency, you're taking a too narrow lens for decision making. It's a consideration, but there are many risks when you only focus on efficiency. Take one example, okay? I remember when people celebrated just-in-time manufacturing. Oh, what a wonderful idea. Why? Because having inventory is very expensive. First of all, you already invest money in all these parts that stand there in the inventory. You need space and money. So there was an obsession to reduce the cost of, in fact, eliminate inventory. The parts should arrive just in time. And that was considered to be a huge innovation in manufacturing in the name of efficiency. And it is very efficient, but it has zero resilience because the slightest disruption, you don't have parts to continue to manufacture. So it was efficiency at the expense of resilience. Even the people who build models for these things, take to Wall Street, finance on Wall Street. So these people are in the risk management business. It's not they don't know about risk. In fact, they have a formula. It's called value at risk. And I want to know, let's say with probability 99%, what is my maximal loss? The probability 99%. And there was one of the quants was David Exley, and he came up with a formula called Gaussian copula function that later was described by Wired magazine as the formula that killed Wall Street, because it really worked with 99%, and you know exactly how much money you can lose with 99%. What it did not do is quantify how much money could you lose at the other 1%. And when that event happened, Wall Street basically crashed. I mean, the government to step in and bail out Wall Street, because otherwise, you know, the whole economy would have gone down. So even the people who were in the risk modeling business, model did not really model enough for resilience. And even our government system, you know, we all can look at democracy, and, you know, Churchill famously said democracy is the worst form of government except for everything else. And democracy is incredibly inefficient. You have the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, very inefficient. What does it give us? Think about it. What does it give us? It gives us resilience. Having a wise, we can all look at China and they are clearly more efficient. And as long as they're making the right decisions, it works well. But there is a huge risk there of one person making incorrect decision with disastrous consequences. In fact, one could argue the problem right now in this country that the executive has too much power, and the other branches, at least the legislative branch, seem to have given up its power. We look at our society. We have built, you know, we have basically completely ignored resilience. Instead, we created a precarious society. Just this studies that came up about 4 years ago talked about how precarious is the majority of the American population. Half of American would have trouble finding $400 to pay for an emergency. 2/3 cannot pay for $1,000 of unexpected expenses. And what happens now? These are the people, that's why we see thousands of people in line for the food bank. And there's an important article just came out by Adam Serwer, The Atlantic, and he says, it didn't have to be like this. This was not, you know, this was basically the result of a series of policies and decisions that created a precarious society, which is the antithesis of resilience. Now let's look at something that has experience with these issues for a long time ago. Nature has been dealing with these issues for a long time. And a few years ago, we published in Communication of the ACM an article. The title was Sex as an Algorithm. I was very proud. This was written by Christopher Papadimitriou, who used to be at Berkeley at the time. And I gave him the title because I proposed to him the title. Turned out when the issue appeared, the combination of the word sex and pink offended many people. But this is a very serious article about the theory of evolution under the lens of computation. And the questions that Adi Livnat and Christopher Papadimitriou asked was, why does nature use a genetic algorithm? So we know that there are genetic algorithms for optimization, and they use crossbreeding, so they mimic sexual reproduction. But there's also simulated annealing, which is essentially asexual search for optimization, just a sequence of mutations. So our computational experience is generally the simulated annealing is more efficient, gives you better result than genetic algorithms. Why did nature use, at least in the animal kingdom, sexual reproduction is almost the exclusive means of reproduction? Okay, we go to lower level organisms, you find asexual reproduction, but in higher animals, it's almost always sex. Why? And so the answer was that sex gives you something that you don't get from simulated annealing. What it does create is a more diverse population. And why it's good to have diverse population? Because diverse population is more resilient to environmental changes. If you optimize yourself too well to the current environment, you'll be very efficient. And maybe you'll become dominant right now. But then the environment will change, you'll have a very hard time adapting. So in some sense, both efficiency and resilience can be viewed as facets of optimization. But what do you optimize for? Efficiency is short-term optimization. I'm simplifying a little bit, but you can think of efficiency as a short-term optimization. How much profit can I make this quarter? And resilience is long-term optimization. How much profit will I make over the next 50 years? Well, nature had to deal between short-term and long-term. And because nature ultimately the way it works is by survival, nature does long-term optimization. So it was a short-term experiment. I mean, short-term means it was a few tens of millions of years. And the dinosaurs were incredibly efficient, but they were not resilient. Mammals proved to be much more resilient and able to adapt to change. So nature at the end, for survival, prefer resilience as long-term optimization to short-term optimization. Now let's go back to us in computer scientists. Okay, this was very general philosophical introduction. So there is this classical book, The Art of Computer Programming, that was the Don Knuth is closer to the patron saint of computer science. And this book, the supposedly 7-volume, by now volume 4 is many sub-volume, they have been the foundation of at least algorithms for many, many years. And I think the topic called analysis of algorithm is really the area that when I was a postdoc at Stanford, this was Don Knuth's talk about analysis of algorithm. And what was it about? So you can go to Wikipedia, and it's all about efficiency. And you can open Don Knuth books, and they're great books. It's all about efficiency. Efficiency, über alles. Just about efficiency. But a few years ago, David Ackley pointed out that this is a very narrow lens to look at algorithm. So let's just look at sorting, right? We all give a bubble sort to our students an example of not a very good algorithm. Why? Because it is quadratic in the worst case, in the average case. Merge sort is a word case of n log n. Quick sort is a combination of its quadratic in the worst case, but typically it's n log n on typical cases. But David Ackley asked, what about robustness? And he did an experiment. Suppose that on 10% of the comparisons, you flip a coin, and with probability 50%, you give the wrong result. Then you look at the outcome, and you see how close it is to being sorted. And the answer is that bubble sort is actually quite robust, while merge sort and quick sort are not. So bubble sort give you a fairly well-sorted list, and the answer is because bubble sort does redundant comparisons. So bubble sort is more resilient than classical good algorithm, merge sort and quick sort. So again, efficiency versus resilience. Let's take another algorithm, classical algorithm, Pagerank, okay? So Pagerank was a amazingly brilliant algorithm developed by Larry Page that would give us that would rank the results of a web search. And the idea was to use the structure of the links to tell us which pages are more important. And the idea was if more pages point to you, you're more important. So if you remember the early days of search engines, when Google came about with the PageRank, it was suddenly you got really good results. Before that, you got pretty crappy results. Suddenly, you got very good results. But people very quickly realized that if PageRank determines on links, you can add your own links to change the ranking of results. And this became a whole industry, search engine optimization. So when I became editor-in-chief of CSM some years ago, I went to the people at Google. I said, I would like you to write an article for me on search results quality. And they says, we would love to write an article. We'll get back to you. And then it got back to me, said, we cannot publish such an article. These are all trade secrets today. As soon as we tell you how we rank results, we're opening it to manipulation. So PageRank is a wonderfully efficient algorithm. It's not resilient. It's too open to manipulation. Even a classical concept in computing, there is something called PAC, probably approximately correct. So you're probably mostly familiar with it with something called PAC learning, which is due to Valiant. But the concept of PAC was introduced by Larry Stockmeyer, generally for a randomized algorithm. And the idea is you get two parameters. One is a bound on the error, and the second one is the confidence. And what you want to do, you want to say with probability, with confidence delta, my error is bounded by epsilon. This is a wonderful concept, many applications. It doesn't say what happened in the margin of 1 minus delta. It doesn't say what happens there. And so a few years ago, some of my colleagues and I said, no, you need to modify this. You need to call it strong pack, because you need to make sure that even with this narrow tail probability, if you compute the expectation, you get good results. Otherwise, your tail can diverge and skew the whole results. So it's very important to design for resilience. And this is something in computing, in algorithms, we have not done. We have not designed for resilience. I'll come back to say where has computing done well with resilience, but not in algorithms. I want to change topic a little bit now and talk about another facets of efficiency that you don't usually see in analysis of algorithm, and this is the concept of friction. So 7 years ago, I wrote, our discipline is dedicated to reducing friction. Latency must be eliminated. Bandwidth must increase. Ubiquity should be universal. Our goal is to reduce the friction of computing communication as much as possible. Facebook, what was the mantra of Facebook? Frictionless sharing. Now we've run this experiment with Facebook, and what do we know now? That frictionless sharing has all kinds of very adverse consequences. Filter bubble, fake news, extreme content. In fact, some people argue that Facebook and other social media are destroying democracy. And if you look, what is the source of this? Is this frictionless sharing. And I'm as guilty as anyone else. I'm a compulsive sharer. When you make it very easy for me, I share compulsively because it's frictionless. So let's look at some other consequence of friction, of reducing friction. So about 10 years ago, there was something called the flash crash. What was the flash crash? The stock market dropped 600 points in 5 minutes. 5 minutes, 600 points. Later on, there was some investigation, and it turns out that this was caused by high frequency trading. This is also called algorithmic trading. So these are people who realize that you can trade much faster as human beings. But now one trade can trigger other trades who can trigger the other trade, and it all happens so fast that poof, the whole market crashes. Now, proponent of high frequency trading say that it makes the market more liquid. But even one of the high prophets of high frequency trading, Thomas Peterfy, says, forget it, there's no social value. It's all about making money. It's basically pursuing speed here just for the sake of profit, but it creates a much less resilient system. Let me go to a whole other arena where we see what is the effect of reducing friction. So Tinder, the goal in friction is to have frictionless dating, right? You have the phone, you swipe left, you swipe right, poof, you hit a match. Wonderful, right? And then Jenna Birch wrote 2 years ago, why is it so hard to turn Tinder date into a relationship? And she said, I had swarms of matches. Nothing turns up into a relationships. And this has been confirmed by various studies. Well, the answer is, it's fairly obvious. You know, because it's so easy, everybody understands that it is easy. There's common knowledge, there's very little investment in it. Everybody understands that everybody has very low investment. So easy comes, there is an old song, easy comes, easy goes. So reducing friction is not necessarily a good thing. So let's go to talk a mechanical engineer and ask mechanical engineer, excuse me, what do you think about friction? And if she's a good mechanical engineer, she will say, it depends. In the drive chain, in the power chain, I want very little friction. On the other hand, the tire should have very high friction. Okay, it would be very bad to have tires with no friction. So Aristotle said once, getting angry is easy, but getting angry at the right person for the right reason, at the right measure, this is hard. So friction, you have to have the right friction in the right place, in the right time, in the right amount. It's difficult to do it. But the goal is not always to eliminate friction. Our discipline has just said, eliminate friction. And I think we need to welcome back friction, and we need to be wise about what's the right amount of friction at the right place at the right time. And again, going back to David Ackley, who wrote about, he said, beyond efficiency, esteem for efficiency should be tempered with respect for robustness. And he said the current way we think about software, we call it CEO software. What is CEO? Correctness and efficiency only. He said the only thing we think about when we write software, it should be correct, it should be efficient. And he talked about, I talk about resilience, he talked about robustness. These are closely related concepts. He said existing software quality matrix should be expanded to include correctness degradation under various fault models. So we need to think more holistically about what are the quality metrics that we want our software to have. Let's take security as another example. So this email is a verbatim quote from a security researcher who had some argument where I complain about how security is done, and this is a respectable security researcher. So he said, this is how security research works. First, somebody builds a thing, and it's super useful. Then eventually somebody else comes along and finds a vulnerability. Then security becomes part of the engineering process. Just like we need to make sure our code doesn't have bugs that make it crash, we also need to make sure our code does not have bugs that can be exploited for bad purposes. Turn the crank for enough years, and eventually security gets better. I mean, Zoom is an example. Zoom became suddenly popular, and then we figure out there are all kinds of security problems with Zoom. But what we don't do is to start thinking about security from day zero. And as a result, I said, look at the list of all Turing Award winners, and you see we have three Turing Awards in cryptography, right? In fact, two in Berkeley. I mean, now Shafi Goldwasser and Blum, they're both at Berkeley. And they all have done fantastic work, but we all understand that the cryptography is just one component of security. And no one so far has received Turing Award in security. And we still don't really know how to build secure infrastructure. And today it's not just about privacy. It's about, we have to worry about attack on the financial system, attack on the water system, attack on the power system. And this is, to me, a colossal failure of our community. But we just got used to it. We don't walk around with a sense of shame. Oh my goodness, we have failed the world. We are running the world now, but we have not provided the foundation for security. And part of this attitude has to be what I would call cyber libertarianism. So let's compare computing to another ubiquitous technology, automobiles. So automobiles, Ford Model T is 1910. And quickly people discovered cars kill people, automobiles kill people. So for the last 100 years, we've been trying to make cars safer. And we actually have been fairly successful. We have been able to reduce fatality per vehicle's mile travel significantly by 2 orders of magnitude over the last 100 years. And we think so important, there is a national transportation safety board. There's no national cybersecurity board. We have security, NSA, NIST, but we are not saying we have not made it as important to make our system more secure than to make transportation more secure. And partly because there is this attitude, which is common in our community, regulation stifle innovation. And innovation should be the only goal. And I would say we have failed to address the security issue. And I have no trust that we will fix it on our own without some forcing function that will come from society, telling us, you must build more secure systems. I want to go back now to economic efficiency. So clearly the relentless pursuit of efficiency prevented us from getting ready for pandemic. It's not if there were no warnings. You can go back, people now go back and they find out there is you can go and find YouTube of Bill Gates 2015. What are you most afraid of? Pandemic. And you can find out all kind of warning people have made a warning. And nobody paid any attention to them. And why is that? Because it would have been expensive to pay attention to that. In fact, Trump, when he cuts the CDC, he said, when I need doctors, I'll hire them then. Why pay for them now? It's inefficient. And even now, you know, apparently there's still not enough PPE. China was worried about they will have a second wave. So they get control of their PPE factories, so they will have enough PPE. Still the world does not seem to have enough PPEs for a pandemic. So what is economic efficiency? So this is definitions from Investopedia. Economic efficiency means good and factor of production are distributed or allocated to the most valuable uses and waste is minimized. How do you achieve efficiency? So free market advocates argue that through individual self-interest and freedom of production, as well as consumption, everybody what we call laissez-faire, economic efficiency is achieved and the best interests of society as a whole are fulfilled. Again, this is from Investopedia. So first of all, this conflates two things, efficiency and optimality. Does efficiency guarantee optimality? So you can go to classical economics and go to microeconomics. So after the financial crisis of 2008, I went to economists. I said, tell me, what does economic really, what theorems do you have? Don't tell me that you believe in free market. Tell me what theorems do you have? Belief, we have lots of people believe different things. I want to say theorem. Told me, go take a look at the welfare theorems. So this is something called the first welfare theorem. And it basically said, under certain reasonable assumptions, we don't go into technicalities, a free market will tend towards a competitive Pareto optimal equilibrium. That's what it does. A competitive Pareto optimal equilibrium. In other words, free markets produce economic efficiency. The question is, does such an equilibrium serve the best interests of society? So does efficiency guarantee optimality? Well, so again, I've mentioned here already Christoph Papadimitriou. I'll come back to him again. In 1991, together with Elias Kotsoupias, they wrote a paper. Later on, this concept became known as the price of anarchy. And they took a classical computer science question. How does this one algorithm perform against another algorithm? And they apply to equilibria. And they ask, what is the ratio between the worst possible Nash equilibrium and the social optimum? And they says, okay, you believe in equilibrium, but we don't know what equilibrium you're going to get. Let's look at the worst Nash equilibrium. And it turned out that the price of anarchy can be arbitrarily high depending on the complexity of the systems. So that means economic efficiency, which means you're in equilibrium. That's what it means. You're in equilibrium. Does not guarantee that the best interests of society as a whole are fulfilled. So you can be efficient, but very, very far from optimal. But it turns out that the whole concept of equilibrium, economic equilibrium, is even more deeply problematic. And it's more deeply problematic for another result by Papadimitriou, this one with Daskalakis and Goldberg from 2005. And how does the market reach equilibrium? It reaches equilibrium by a sequence of local optimization steps. I can see that I can raise the price, so I'm raising the price. Somebody else, demand goes down. So gradually the system converges. How long does it take? Well, they show us there are systems in which convergence to a mixed Nash equilibrium can take very, very long time. I mean, there is a technical expression that people complete, but I won't go into it. The answer is it takes a long time. But if it takes a long time, it means the market is never equilibrium. Why? Because things change. If you take a very long time, circumstances change, price change, supply change, demand will change. So there's really never, realistically, equilibrium is a myth. The market is never in equilibrium, and there is no efficiency and no optimality. So is the free market a fantastic engine of innovation? Absolutely. But people invested in, have given to it mythical qualities that it simply does not have. Now, there is an old movie from the 80s. It's called Wall Street, and there's a famous character, Gordon Gekko, played by Mike Douglas, in which he gave a speech, greed, for lack of a better word, is good. And the argument was, again, this invisible hand that somehow guarantee optimal outcome. But we don't need Papa Dimitriou to know that. Every senior CS student knows that greedy algorithm gets stuck in local optima. And how do you get out of a local optima? You need to change the system. You need to change the incentive structure. For example, right now, with cybersecurity, we seem to be stuck in a local optimum. No company has incentive to make this huge investment to make the product more secure. It's a market failure, and the only way to fix a market failure is by government action. In fact, this idea, these flaws in economics are not even to economists. So there is something which economists call homo economicus, which is this supremely rational, optimizing, self-interested human that just always optimizes and try to have optimal outcomes. And of course, we are all familiar with Kahneman and Tversky and all the work on cognitive biases. But already in 1956, Herb Simon showed that human beings don't always try to optimize. Most of the time, they settle for good enough outcome. They call it satisficing, combination of satisfaction and suffice. It's called satisficing. And satisfying is less efficient because you're not optimizing, but it's more resilience, okay? If you're optimizing, if I go to the optimum, you get the optimal result, it's non-resilience. Satisficing enables you to build resilience into the system. And I want to give you a technical example of some recent work of mine that look at the shift between optimizing and satisficing. So what I'm saying, these are not just philosophical concepts, they can affect even very theoretical work. So just this, I'm going to get a bit technical here for a couple of slides. So people have studied discounted sum games with rewards. So you have two strategic players, we call them 0 and 1. And in every state, they get a reward. And they keep making moves and change states. And you aggregate the reward using some discounted sum relative to some discounted discount factor. And the optimization problem is for player 0 to find a strategy that would maximize the reward against all player 1 strategies. And this is a beautiful result. This has a solution. It's used value iteration, which is a very well-known algorithm also in come from OR. Now it's used a lot in AI. You can use value iteration in polynomial time. You solve the optimization problem. So what my collaborator and I have looked at is we want to take these games and add resilience. And how do we want to add resilience? We want to add, on top of optimizing the reward, we want to add what's called temporally extended goals. We want to say certain things must be the case. You cannot just optimize the reward. For example, these are called temporally extended goals. These are something we can specify in temporal logic. Every message sent is eventually received, and so on and so forth. You can state such goals. Turns out that once you add such what we call hard constraints, so these are the reward is a soft constraint. You want to optimize the reward. These are hard constraints. Once you add these hard constraints, there's no optimal strategy anymore. So what do we do? There's no optimal strategy. So we said, let's do satisficing. Let's define a threshold and asking, is there a strategy that will guarantee the hard constraint, the temporal constraints, and would guarantee that the reward is greater than the threshold? So that's what we want now. We want a resilient system. It's not optimal. We just want it to be resilient. And it turns out that now you have to give a value iteration, because value iteration is an optimization algorithm. But we came up with other algorithm. They are more limited. We can only handle integral discount factor, which is a serious limitation. But it does give us an algorithm to build resilient strategies, because optimal strategies don't exist in this case. Now, I've kind of been dumped on computer science, but there is one area that I think computer science has shown in the last few months. Everything around us was collapsing. One thing worked. and the internet. I mean, I'm using internet here as a big term, the ecosystem, okay? I'm talking to you on the internet. We're all working from home. We're shopping from home. We're teaching from home. We're learning from home. Suddenly, you know, there was this small company Zoom, and suddenly everybody using Zoom, and it survived. It scaled. This is actually quite amazing. What was the principle that underlied this resilience? The answer is redundancy. In fact, the internet was built for resilience from day one. Remember, it was a military network. It was supposed to survive a nuclear war. And we know actually, we have a key design principle in computing and communication. You build resilience by using redundancy. So error correcting codes, I think that's, as far as I know, is one of the very first example of resilience via redundancy. And then when von Neumann talks about reliable organisms, again, he showed that you can build resilience, reliability by adding redundancy. And in fact, now it's understood in other areas. After the 2008 financial crisis, now we subject banks to stress tests. What is a stress test about? It's about redundancy of capital. You have enough capital to survive a crisis, not only for ongoing business. So I want to summarize here and to say that resilience is a fundamental but underappreciated societal need. And both computing and economics need to increase their focus on resilience. So it turns out that markets are not good for preparing for very low probability events. People are not very good. I mean, I have car insurance because I have to have car insurance. Suppose that I was not required to have car insurance. Well, many people will not buy car insurance. Basically, we have a societal action, a forcing function that requires people to have car insurance. So we have now dealt with one big crisis, a pandemic, but it's quite clear there's another crisis just coming downstream. We have another crisis, big crisis coming, and this is climate change. For example, you might have heard the news that in the Arctic now we've reached temperature over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and this is the highest temperature that has ever been recorded in the Arctic. The town of Verkhoyansk at 67.5 north. This is very high north. Have reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit. This is Houston temperature in Siberia. So there was an important report that came out just about a year ago about biodiversity and ecosystem. In the scientific report, it's about biodiversity and ecosystems. But the scientists who wrote it could not stop themselves and says, this is driven by economics. There's economic incentive generally have favored expanding economic activity and often environmental harm over conservation and restoration. So we must change how we think about the economic system. We cannot just think about efficiency. We must, in this case, talk about conservation, restoration. Again, I would say it's about resilience over efficiency. And this is going to mean that we'll have to really rethink governance. Already a colleague of mine, an economist, wrote in 2009 about the fact that there is a fundamental economic trade-off, almost Faustian, between economic growth on one hand and equity and stability on the other. Different societies decide to have different emphases. But unfortunately, as the world is becoming increasingly more interconnected through trade and improvement in transportation, information technologies, one society's choice invariably affects the welfare of others. So if one society said, we are going to invest in resilience, another society in the short term will outrun it by investing in efficiency. So we somehow, in a global way, we have to change the incentive system, talk about resilience globally, not only per country. I want to close by telling you that I'm not the only one who is coming up. I think it's being said in different ways. There was a kind of a blog written by Mark Anderson, who is a venture capitalist, well known from Mosaic. He wrote it in April. He said, it's time to build. He wrote, every Western institution was unprepared for the coronavirus pandemic, despite many prior warnings. This monumental failure of institutional effectiveness will reverberate for the rest of the decade, but it's not too early to ask why and what do we need to do about it. And he said, part of the problem is clearly foresight, a failure of imagination. But the other part of the problem is what we did not do in advance and what we are failing to do now. That is a failure of action, and specifically our widespread inability to build. He said, we need to build. And to me, again, you need to build. It's another way of talking. We need to build resilient systems. We need to build. We can't just optimize. We need to build. And again, just earlier this month, a report from the Royal Academy of Engineering in the UK, and the title was Engineering a Resilient Future. As the UK tentatively emerges from lockdown, engineers can play a strong leadership role to identify and manage the socio-technical, economic, and systemic risk, which could limit further harmful impact from this crisis, advising government on how to engineer a more resilient future. So I think as engineers, we need to start thinking. We have been obsessed with efficiency, and we need to start thinking about how to build a resilient future. And I want to finish with this statement about digital humanism and give you my version of it. And for this, I want to quote Ada Lovelace, another patron saint, the first programmer. In 1843, she writes a letter to Charles Babbage. So Charles Babbage was an entrepreneur. So, you know, he wrote about the analytical engine. What was his goal? His goal was to make money. He wanted to make money. He didn't succeed, but that was his goal. And she writes to him a nice letter, kind of a bit old-fashioned English, of course. And she said, I'm okay with you making money, but I wish to add my might towards expounding and interpreting the Almighty and his laws and works for the most effective use of mankind. And I think especially Berkeley, Silicon Valley, yeah, they pay lip service to making the world a better place, but we all know what's driving it, money. And I think especially for academics, it's very important that we follow Ada Lovelace. Let's build technology for the most effective use of mankind. Technology for people. Technology for people. Thank you very much. So, how do we do Q&A now?
Thank you very much. Well, Frank, or who are there are two students who are in charge of this seminar. I don't want to take over. So would you like to organize the questions?
Yeah, sure. Generally, we just ask questions one by one. If someone would like to ask questions anonymously, they can always send me a message privately, and I can relay their questions to Professor Vardi.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm stop sharing so we can see who is here. Yeah. Okay. Very good.
Thank you very much, Moshe. It was illuminating, and I hope it's really the future of the students is on stake. So I won't be around too long, but they will, and it's important they understand what you said.
Any thoughts, comment, question?
Quick question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, David, go ahead. You're frozen.
Seems like his internet.
Oh, I think my internet is a little problem. Anyway, I don't know if you can hear me now, but I'll just ask. What's the sort of your opinion, or the sort of connections between, you talked about resilience? What's the connections between that and like robust optimization?
So to me, robust optimization is an aspect of resilience. So if you're doing robust optimization, again, I mean, the part of the issue is that very often optimization by its nature sacrifices robustness. And in fact, one of the things we saw that once you add robustness as a requirement, there's no optimal results anymore. You're giving up on the fact that there is optimality. Right. And so, for example, in our technical work, we said, okay, if there's no optimality, can we guarantee good enough? Because then you can combine. To me, so that's an example of, I don't want to call it optimization, but it's a form of satisfying you some sense. It's a more a benign optimization, which you don't ask for the best of all possible world, just say, this is good enough, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, in fact, I can tell you that years ago, I was department chair, and we made the faculty hire, and I had to negotiate with the person.
Mm-hmm.
And that person just kept asking and asking and asking, pushing to see what that person can get. Just more and more and more. At some point you say no, but clearly the person's answer was ask until you reach the bound. And this was this was the end of my service as a chair. I finished being a chair on June 30th. And I remember I told the person who on July 1 is going to be chair, I said, this person is going to be trouble. We made him an offer, so but this person is going to be trouble. I was right on the money. Okay. You know, so there is something in the obsession for optimality. I mean, if you think about it, if you have a friend and all your friend cares about is money, for example, most likely he's not going to stay your friend because he's he's going to be an asshole. Okay. So at the same time, we all know that you need some, you know, in this society, if you don't have money, you can make a living, right? We don't want to be waiting for hours in a food bank. We look at it and we say, this is horrible, right? So, but actually, most people are happy with good enough. And so a little less obsession with optimality and with going to satisficing can give us, I think there are lots of interesting, I just want to give a small example how we were able to actually ask a technical question how to do this. Yeah. But I think generally we need to revisit the lens and look at computing and economic, but I'm not an economist. We look at computing with a broader lens, which is, yes, we want to optimize, but resiliency has to be built in from day one. Cybersecurity has to be built in from day one. You can't just go later and say, okay, now we can add cybersecurity because we have customers and they want security. We need to start building security from day one. Yes, it costs money, absolutely.
Thanks.
Actually, I have a question as well.
Yeah.
So just to follow up on what David said, and also can
you turn your video? It makes it a bit more humane to see a person.
Oh, to see my face? Let me see. Okay, sure. Let me see if I can make that work. Just 1 second.
Oh, you're in outer space. You look like Darth Vader in outer space. Okay, go ahead. Ask your question.
Basically, my question is on like ties to robust optimization as well. So from robust optimization, I know there's many ways to kind of think about it. So one is, targeting worst case scenarios. Others are saying something like, I'm going to optimize for like in expectation or for a certain percentage of risk. And you gave an example about Wall Street, and maybe I didn't quite understand it entirely, but you said something like, they prepare for like the 99%, but like this 1% scenario that happened, like, everything blew up. And I guess my question is, how do you determine how much preparation is enough? Because you said, there's a trade-off between efficiency and resilience. So you could always say something like, let's always prepare for the worst case. But then in long term, that can also be detrimental. And then for other cases, it's like, maybe it's good enough to not always think about worst case, but also just like have some like ratio of like trade-off between efficiency and resilience. I just want to get your opinion and like your feedback, just to make sure I'm understanding the whole scenario. Because to me, there's still that question, there's many ways to think about this, but how do I decide when to focus on worst case versus, it's okay to get this amount of resilience?
So the answer is, this is a trade-off, and we all make decisions. So if you drive, I used to drive to work, okay? Just very short, 3 miles to work. And by doing it, I take some risk, okay? What was the risk? I can probably calculate it, but I think right now the fatality rate for billion vehicles mile traveled is about 8. 8 people die for billion vehicles mile traveled. So I can calculate what is my risk in traveling to work, and let's suppose it is 1 in 10 million. I didn't do a precise calculation. And I said, 1 in 10 million, I'm taking the risk because I like the efficiency of driving to work. But suppose you told me, it's 1 in 1,000. I said, wow, that's very high risk. I'm not willing to take it. So this is a trade-off. The problem in Wall Street, first of all, 1%, if I give you, here's a gun, the chamber has 100 bullets, 100 slots, put 1 bullet in it. So your risk is 1 in 100. But I'll give you $1 million to play Russian roulette with the risk of 100 that you die. Will you play this game? Most people will say 1 in 100. No way. This is way too high for me. So Wall Street basically played Russian roulette because the 1% was they die. Now, I said, for example, one of the things that we did is you need to say, what happens in this one? They did not model the 1%. So they had no idea what happens. And the answer was, Wall Street collapses and basically you die. So, for example, I showed that there is one possibility to try to address it, is to try to model this. I said, what happened? I said, what is the expected case? What is the expectation? You see, if you chop off the 1%, it doesn't tell you what the expectation is. But if you're doing more holistic modeling and you compute the expectation, you have a better idea how does this remote possibility, how does it affect you, okay? Because if the answer was with 99%, let's say you lose $10 million and they think they can lose $10 million. But with probability 1%, you lose $1 billion, you can do the expectation and suddenly to say, oh my goodness, this is suddenly become much more serious. So it's not as if you cannot eliminate risk, and there's no way to fully shelter yourself. None of us does it. In life we take risk all the time. But the point is we're making trade-offs. And so we will have to look at efficiency versus risk and make trade-offs, just like everything else in life. But it has to be explicit. If we just say, forget the resilience, just focus on efficiency, then we're going to take huge risks. We're not going to prepare for them.
Okay, I see the point. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
I also have a question.
Yes.
So I was wondering, you were sort of talking about possibly the role of government.
There is some echo on your line. I cannot. This is Kylene talking. I cannot hear it. There's echo on your line somehow.
Kylene, if you don't mind, maybe you can type your question.
Maybe type your question. No, yeah, type your question. Type your question on the chat. Okay, she's typing. Anybody else has a question in the meantime? Okay, so we'll let for Kylene type her question. I'll give you 15 more seconds, Kylene.
I can ask something in the meanwhile.
Okay, yes, Marcus. Marius.
I'm wondering that, so what you're proposing is that like we as a society should shift our focus from efficiency to resilience.
Broaden our focus.
Okay. I wonder though that how engineers will convince economists and like how you see that process going, because it's a societal negotiation and kind of like in democracy, kind of like everybody needs to be involved. And that means for me, like, it sounds like a re-education program of people like, hey, don't like purely optimize, also think about resilience in some way. So I wonder how you think we would get there as a society.
So take for example, this issue of infrastructure, that it is well known in the United States, we've neglected infrastructure, roads, bridges, other infrastructure. Why? They're expensive, okay? In fact, Trump promised infrastructure, just didn't do anything. Or the answer is that I think somebody come and explain why we need to do it. And actually it has economic benefits as well, right? It will create jobs. We need not to create jobs. I think so people will be open. We need, somebody needs to talk to people as mature adults and explain the importance of investing in resilience and show us what happened when we did not have resilience. And I think, ultimately it's a democratic system, right? I'm talking to you. I'm hoping to convince the 30 people attending this talk. Go and convince, if everybody here convince 30 more people, that's how we change society. Okay. Now let's look at Kylene. So my question is, your point to government as a possible solution to markets being built for high efficiency but low resilience. But a lot of structure has been built recently by large tech ecosystem, Google search et al. Do you think tech companies would have a role in building better structure that help remedy some of the lack of resilience, too little frictions? So I think companies have done a great job in building resilient systems that are direct in their business interest. There's no question about it, okay? And I said, one of the great lessons, in fact, that the only thing that seems to have survived is everything is collapsing around us, except the internet is holding us together. Here we are, talking on the internet. So I think there is a great lesson indeed that we need to look at what are the principles of building reliability, and as a resilience in this case, I think it was redundancy. But I'm simplifying, but of course, a lot of research went to how to build resilient communication systems. And, our tech companies, I think where we need forcing function is to convince tech companies to invest in another company to invest, and we are not investing enough. And so they are investing a lot. So like if you go, Amazon invests a lot in security of the cloud because it's a direct business interest. But somehow we see we have data breaches almost weekly, okay? And the penalty does not seem, one could ask ourselves, how do we change the incentive structure so companies from the day one invest more in cybersecurity? So, I mean, right now, if you think about it, most of the time security doesn't sell because security is something bad will not happen. And so it's an absence of something. While features sell, so we sell because features sell. And I think that forcing, requiring cybersecurity to be built into product will require some government action. I don't think it will happen. The reality now, we are in business now for, 70 years. And we still don't have, we still have not said, no, cybersecurity must be from ground zero. We have not done it yet. So I think we will have to change incentive structure to build security. Thank you all very much. It was a pleasure talking to you. Keep it in your mind. Think how it's going to change what you do. Resilience, resilience, resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor, and thank you everyone for coming. I'm gonna stop recording for one thing.